What are hymns, and why is it worth singing them as a church? We have a very special guest on the pod this week. The founder of Indelible Grace Music, Kevin Twit, joined Aaron and I for a Zoom chat. At Gabalfa, we sing several Indelible Grace Music hymns. All of these are old hymn texts set to new melodies. That's really what they do at Indelible Grace Music. And Kevin has been doing that since the mid-90s, and his and Indelible Grace Music's hymns are sung by many churches across the world. So it was really great to be able to pick Kevin's brains about what makes a good singable hymn. Some acronyms that will help you when you listen to today's conversation. So PCA means Presbyterian Church in America, which is the group of churches that Kevin is a pastor of. And RUF means Reformed University Fellowship, which is a group of American colleges, one of which, Belmont University. Kevin has worked as a campus pastor since 1995. Hopefully, those will help you as you listen. You're listening to Hymnology 101. We hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hymnology 101 podcast with me, Sam.
Me, Aaron.
And a really special guest, Kevin Twit.
Hello.
How are you
Good
doing,
to be
Kevin?
here. I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Nashville, Tennessee.
Wow. And what time is it where you are?
Right now, it's 10:19 a.m.
Wow.
Central Time.
It's 4:19 p.m. over here. So,
okay. So you guys are starting to drop off. You need your afternoon coffee.
That's right. Yeah. I've actually had about 3 coffees at Aaron's house earlier today. But yeah, thanks so much for having you on. This podcast, thanks so much for coming on. This podcast is about really me and Aaron's. It's quite dramatic beginning we have. It's our journey that we've been on. But it's really just an excuse to talk about hymns, history, some hymns we are trying to put new tunes to, and just talking about that. So you're the OG at putting tunes.
I don't know. Not exactly, but I think a lot of people think that. But I can
I
get into
I
that
thought if I say that, Kevin's going to be like, no. I mean, did you know anyone else who was doing that?
I did.
Who inspired you to sort of take this up?
Yeah, I think necessity inspired me as far as, and I can tell you that story. But I did know about a few attempts that had happened. For instance, James Ward, who was music director at a church in Chattanooga, had done a version of Rock of Ages. Okay. That's in the Trinity hymnal, which is the hymnal the PCA and the OPC use. I'm a PCA minister. There was some fledgling attempts that had begun within RUF before I got involved. So I went to Berklee College of Music, was planning to be a music engineer, had moved to Nashville, worked in a studio for a couple of years, and then I joined a rock and roll band, typical path, and took up teaching the college Sunday school class at a place called Christ Community Church, where Scotty Smith was the pastor. A lot of music business people were there, especially in the late 80s, 90s. And then RUF came to Vanderbilt. I want to say it was around 89 or 90. Well, probably 90, 91. And I would hear about from my students. I remember very specifically quoting the J.C. Ryle Holiness, his book. And which, if your listeners don't know that book, they should track it down. It's the book that really brought me into the Reformed faith through the doctrine of sanctification, because it just had real substance to it, instead of a lot of the stuff I'd been exposed to before that. Anyway, I was like, she said, my RUF minister told me I should read that book. And I thought, what? Like, there's a college ministry that knows about and recommends J.C. Ryle's Holiness. I need to know more about this. So when I went up to RUF at Vanderbilt there, with my long perm mullet, I stuck out like a sore thumb, as you can imagine. Wow. And it's a very prim and proper place. At least it was then. It's less so now. But they were singing a few hymns to new tunes. Like, we would do the Scottish metrical psalm of Psalm 19 to John Denver's Danny song.
Oh, right. Because we sing Psalm 19
do you?
To the Scottish.
Like, Lord, thy word abideth. And yeah, it's an awful tune to put to Psalm 19, right? So they were doing it a little bit. They were trying to avoid some of the kind of cheesy, this was before modern worship, but, They were trying to find some like scripture songs, but they would still sing "Blind Man Stood by the Road and Cried." They were doing like some kind of youth ministry songs, but they were trying to do some. And a guy named Darwin Jordan, who was a musician but also a pastor in an organization called RYM, Reformed Youth Ministries, which is kind of like a high school equivalent of RUF, which is the college ministry of the PCA. It's not a denominational thing, but it's very closely related. He had done a few songs, but he's a piano player. Some of them were a little Las Vegas-y for me. Like he had a version of Come Ye Sinners that was the original text by Joseph Hart, not the 19th century, altered version that a lot of people sing. But the tune, I didn't love the tune, but at least like it was happening a little bit. And so songs like Jesus on My Cross Have Taken, How Sweet the Name Jesus Sounds, some of those songs were circulating a little bit in RUF. And that year I started going there, Chris Minor was a freshman at Vanderbilt. And if you know any of our music, Indelible Grace music, he wrote so many of those songs, like Oh Love That Want Me Go, God Be Merciful, On Jordan's Stormy Banks, all these. He wrote so many of those his freshman year in college.
The Gettys have just discovered On Jordan's Stormy Banks.
They just did license it. That's right. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. It was cool, isn't it?
And yeah, that's good. I love Keith. I still kind of like our version. But once you hear it in your head, it's hard to, like Jars of Clay recorded some of our songs, and they're friends of mine, but they they had to alter the melody just a little bit. And I was like, why'd you do that? We like it this way. Guys. I'm kind of anal about that kind of stuff. So you don't want to be in the studio with me trying to sing a vocal and me being super picky about what you're doing. Well, anyway, so that had happened a little bit. And then I went off to seminary, 92 to 95, Covenant Seminary in St. Louis. And some of that was still kind of percolating a little bit. Yeah, but when I came back in 95, the first hymn tune I wrote was Arise, My Soul, Arise.
Yeah, well, okay. We'll get onto that because that was when I first came to Gabalfa. We would talk, me and a few other guys, about Gabalfa classics, songs that we only knew because we started coming to this church. That was one song that we'd sing a lot, and we still sing it. So in research for this podcast, me and Aaron watched Roots and Wings.
You did?
Indelible Grace documentary.
How did it hold up?
Yeah, it's good, man. It's really helpful.
Yeah, we liked it.
Yeah. And I want to quote back to you something you said, which I think will help us get into sort of that time, mid-90s, where you began to properly start to write those tunes. You said something like, I was tired of singing songs that undermined the gospel I was trying to preach.
Yes.
So can you take us into like that? Like, what was it like in the mid-90s? What were the songs that were on offer?
Right, because you all weren't even born, were you?
I was 1 in 95, 1 year old. 1 year old.
I was 2.
Yeah. Oh, crazy. My oldest son was born in 2000, so the year the first Indelible Grace record came out. So
okay, cool.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So I don't know if you know this book by David Brooks, Bobos in Paradise. He's a New York Times columnist. He talks about the bourgeois bohemians. Like there's always kind of been this split between the two. This was the time of like Willow Creek and church growth. And if you've listened, you told me you listened to the Mars Hill podcast, so that's kind of one reaction to some of that. I think part of what we were looking for was something real and more authentic and more solid as well. So we were, all the songs were these songs about, this is how I feel, Lord, I just wanna, kind of songs. And, I had kind of become reformed in my theology in the late 80s, had been reading and studying a lot, even though I was working in the music business, and definitely had some convictions about like the gospel and not just in a kind of broad sense, but even a specific, like really understanding salvation by grace alone and those things, and the importance of those things, and the really the engine that is for spirituality, right? And so as I would be talking to students, I found that a lot of the songs we were singing were undermining what I was trying to teach them, because like one of my RUF pastor friends said, basically every college student I meet with is trying to get back to a mountaintop experience they had at middle school church camp. And, if you've read John Newton's letters, if you haven't, I commend them to you. He's got 3 letters where he talks about the stages of growth in a Christian's life. And he talks about how the stage of a growing Christian usually feels like God has deserted you. And of course, he mentions that sort of experience in his hymn, I Asked the Lord That I Might Grow. But he talks about that in his letters. He also has a letter on the advantages of remaining sin, because it's so difficult for, like, basically to paraphrase him, he says, being told that learning that we are helpless apart from God's grace is a truth that one rarely learns just by being told about it.
Yeah.
You have to experience it. So if that's true, and a lot of the students I'm meeting with are church students who basically have this view that if they have doubts, they probably aren't Christians. And that's what I was finding a lot. People would be like, since I've come to college, I'm not reading my Bible. I don't feel the presence of God like I used to. Maybe I'm not even a Christian. I would say, well, why do you think that? And I lean into that. I think some of it is they're not singing the Psalms. They don't know the Psalms. So their view of spirituality and what the normal Christian life feels like was very skewed.
Yeah.
And that's why I was like, man, we have got to find some better songs to sing. And, when I discovered like Ann Steele, Dear Refuge of My Weary Soul, I was like, oh my gosh, like you can sing things like that in church, because that's not. And see, I'd been in a Christian band and we'd had a song that was kind of an honest song about repentance that wouldn't get played on Christian radio. So I just knew, like, there's this whole, like, I mean, there just was this whole vibe of, testimonies from the beautiful people. And it just, sermons were like 3 steps to a happy marriage. Everything was watered down. And I think a lot of the music was that way. Honestly, if you go back and look at like those kind of church growthy sermons, they take a rich biblical narrative, reduce it to 3 steps, how-to steps. And a lot of the Christian music was the same way. It was just kind of a raw appeal to our will without our mind or our imaginations being involved, without seeing Jesus as more beautiful and believable. And I was just finding these hymns just were so rich. And I just started giving out the text sometimes to my students, because I had a lot of amazing songwriting students. And, for about 5 years, we were doing this music kind of in our Sunday school class, not at the main church service. Every once in a while, we'd get to lead on a Sunday, like a youth Sunday, and we'd do some. But for the most part, we had our little counterculture community going on. And I had some great musicians. I mean, I had people like Sandra McCracken and Matthew Smith and Matthew Cameron Jones. I had the Jars of Clay guys because they dropped out of college in Nashville. So some of it, and then I had a background as a recording engineer.
I wish I had a background as a recording engineer, because
everybody needs it now during COVID.
Self-producing is an absolute nightmare.
Well, the only problem is my background was before Pro Tools, so I don't really know much about that. I made the first record on an SSL console and a Mitsubishi 32-track digital tape machine, like in a real studio. And after that, we started using Pro Tools, and I'm kind of clueless.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Oh
well. So can I just list some songs that we sing by you? Because I think our church would definitely love to hear you talk about
some of them.
About some of them. And I'd personally be really interested to know. About the melodies, like how when you look at a text, how do you think mechanically, like, right, I'm going to write a melody for this. So there's quite a lot of Indelible Grace songs we sing. Aaron, tell me if I miss any here. So Jesus, I My Cross Have Taken.
Right.
The longest song we sing, I'd say. We go for it. We even do the hallelujahs at the end,
Right. Oh, nice.
I love that. It's great. So there we go. Arise,
Me too. We never do that live, except we did it at the Ryman, I think.
That's what we basically.
We base it on that,
yeah. On Arise, My Soul, Arise, on Jordan's stormy banks. So that Chris, who
Minor, Chris Minor wrote that text or tune,
Hail to the Lord's Anointed that Sandra McCracken sings. We sing that in Advent and stuff. Come, You Souls by Sin Afflicted. And and Heal Us.
Okay, good.
And I'd say that one at the moment is one of our church's favorite songs, Heal Us. So there was one of our church members, tragically, his son, who's 30 years old, died. And in the funeral service, and it was all his side, a non-Christian family. But he asked if the lyric video for Heal Us would be played as part of the service. So which ones of those did you personally work on to put a tune to? Because I know Indelible Grace is bigger,
3 of those, if I got my count right. Heal Us, Come, You Souls, and Arise.
Nice.
And Arise was the first one I did.
Cool. Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, I'll tell you the context of that. So, we had, like I say, there was a few, like Rock of Ages we would do sometimes. There were a few of the RUF songs that already existed, like on Georgia Story Banks, Jesus on My Cross. Those were kind of in circulation, hadn't been recorded by anybody yet, but we were singing them. And there was And Can It Be as well. The guy who'd been a youth pastor had been in a band with Michael Card, a guy named Scott Rowley. He had written that one. So that was kind of circulating in our church. So there were a few. So there was a thing called Sonship, a guy named Jack Miller, who'd been a professor at Westminster Seminary. He'd actually at one point was Tim Keller's pastor. He's a guy not a lot of people know, but he eventually started an organization called World Harvest, which then became Surge. Really getting, the way my friend Scotty Smith would say, helping people hear not just the lyrics of the gospel, but the music as well. So it's really kind of applying the gospel to people's hearts, particularly training missionaries. So that it was at the last conference that he did personally before he passed away.
Wow.
I was at the conference along with some other folks from the church. And the first night he had us pick up the Trinity hymnal. And we tried to sing a cappella the tune that's in the Trinity hymnal, which sounds a bit like a funeral dirge.
How does it go? The original?
I don't even really remember it.
Aaron,
it kind of steps down though.
About which song now?
Arise, my
soul, arise.
Tune for that?
I mean, I know one tune for it, but there's multiple tunes you could sing it
Especially
to.
in the UK versus America, it might be different.
Yeah.
But the Red Trinity hymnal has it in there. Interesting little sidelight. My friend Lester Ruth, who's research professor of worship at Duke, asked me once where I found the text for Arise, My Soul, Rise. He said, I think it's Wesley's best text, but it hasn't been in a Methodist hymnal for 100 years. And I said, well, it's in the Presbyterian hymnal because it's a great hymn about communion, about the Lord's Supper. And so anyway, but so it was in the Trinity hymnal, but the tune just didn't seem to match the energy, right? But the text so much celebrated what this conference was trying to teach about, what it means to be an adopted child of God and what that feels like. Though there is actually one verse that Charles wrote that John refused to put in the Methodist hymn book because he thought it was too subjective. The one about the still small voice. So I didn't record that one. If you go to the Indelible Grace hymn book online, you can find that verse, but we don't usually sing it. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
So that one, so after that first night, the next afternoon, I just basically picked out my guitar and it probably came to me in about 15 minutes. Now you asked like how I go about it. What I generally recommend to people is to say the text out loud. Just speak the text out loud over and over. Try to find the right cadence, the right rhythm, even the right feel, and then try to go from that to singing something.
Nice.
I find almost every tune that I've written with a guitar that started as guitar chords, it feels like you're cramming the words in. And I can tell when somebody sends me one that I'm like, okay, you just like cram the word. And they really will. Most people will only apprehend it by singing, not by playing. So it doesn't matter if you have a clever chord progression. Is there something, does the melody make sense of the way you would say it out loud? It probably will sing well then.
What you're explaining is exactly the way that I lean. And because Aaron doesn't play guitar really. And so he will send me just voice notes, which probably serves.
I don't even use a piano. I just kind of come up with melodies and then send it to Sam, and then he puts the chords to
and then he finds the chords. That's right. That's why. But I can hear one like Sometimes the Light Surprises that I wrote. That one, it's a kind of a boring melody, but it's a cool little guitar riff. But it's hard to, like, the melodies tend to stay on one note and then move a little. But now Chris Minor, like Georgia Story Banks, like he writes all of his really slow. Like if you go on Bandcamp and look up Christopher Minor, you can hear his original versions of Oh Love That Want to Go and Georgia Story Banks, and they're almost excruciatingly slow to some people. I think they're brilliant and beautiful and full of pathos. But anyway, that's how I wrote that first one. And I think probably because the good and the bad, having a female echo part makes it less useful in some contexts, but then in others. Anyway, we actually do a different version of that one, which I'd love to record sometime. We've reharmonized the chords, flatted one of the notes, and it's more of like a kind of black gospel version. Right. I've got a horn chart for it. And I'll just give you a little
Yeah.
what do we call it? A little sneak preview. But we're gonna have another big hymn sing in Memphis next summer.
Amazing.
I don't know if tickets will be available because it's in a venue that only seats 2,000, and it'll be during the General Assembly of the PCA, their 50th anniversary, and the 50th anniversary of RUF is next year. So June 14th in Memphis. I think we're going to live stream it though as well.
Class.
But I'm going to get a lot of the Indelible Grace artists, and we're going to have this big hymn string. So I'm hoping that we'll do that version there, and then we can record it too. So that was the first one I did. Come Ye Souls.
Yeah,
that one's interesting. I think it was similar. I definitely was probably thinking more like trying to I don't remember exactly, but I love the way it builds. And I love, I'm a fan of Sacred Heart shape note singing. I don't know if you've ever leaned into that.
I don't know what that is.
You should get Matt Hinton, who made this documentary called Awake My Soul.
Okay.
It's a way of singing that was popular in the kind of early days of America, and then kind of got squelched because it didn't seem to fit the formal rules of harmony and whatnot. But it's kind of hung on in some places in the South, and now it's spread. It's really fascinating. Just look up Awake My Soul, that documentary, watch it sometime. But anyway, I like at the end, the harmonies, like in some ways, like are just jarring and they make no sense, because we basically set up a couple. On the very end, that last verse.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Because, but it's lovely, but not like if somebody a musicologist tried to analyze that. Yeah. Right. It's just very discordant, but it kind of all works. We just set up a couple mics at the end of our RUF meeting and then had our whole group sing. Heal Us is interesting because that one I've had for a long time. So we made a thing called the RUF hymn book in 2002 or 3 when we got a grant from the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. And we put that one in there, but I wasn't really satisfied with it. Okay. And I never recorded it, but there was an RUF group in New York that recorded it like in the 90s. But I just kind of had forgotten about it. And then, we had a lot of, kind of around the world. Of course, you couldn't miss, George Floyd and Ferguson, and a lot of racial tension. It really hit a lot of our students in a really big way, because I think a lot of people thought, hey, we're better now than we used to be. Maybe we're not. And African Americans begin to tell their stories, and a lot of people were just really sobered by that. And that, I think, for some reason, that one kind of came back around to me, and yet I felt like it needed to be in more of a Black gospel voice. And so my friend Lucas Morton, who's went on to produce a bunch of cool records now, brilliant musician, he was over and he plays piano, and we were kind of messing with it. I was like, I really want to try and see if we can do it in a more gospel-y way. And I particularly love the way it says heal us, not heal them, which I think is really important. If you think about being able to come together, that's where we need to start. Yes. And so he hit that chord, that G sharp chord. It's like a 3 major. Yeah,
it's a game changer.
That's
really nice.
So he hit on that chord, and then the rest of it just flowed. And then he had done. And the cool thing is, in RUF, for a few years before that, we had started doing our summer national conference with a historic Black university, Jackson State, and our Belmont group, combining together, trying to find what are the songs we can sing together. So that also kind of came out of that, like trying to find, how can you take this idea of new tunes to old hymns? Doesn't have to be a bluegrass. Like the idea can be incarnate in lots of different musical styles. And so I was kind of trying to find that. In the Hours was maybe the first one we did that way. And then Heal Us, we were able to get like the Jackson State students to sing on that one. And my friend Blessing Offer, who now has a big record deal and he's starting to make some waves, but he was a Belmont student.
His vocal is incredible on that recording.
He's got a great voice.
Lush. I think
he's got a record coming out soon. The
thing that drew us, like looking at those 3 songs, but all the others that really in that list from Indelible Grace is, I think something we really believe is that we come to church empty and weak. We barely get through the door, after a week. And then Jesus wants to fill us with grace and peace and give us all the gifts.
Mhm.
So come, you souls with sin afflicted, heal
Yeah.
us. It's like
It's really appropriate.
Yes.
those songs, we were like, this
Yeah.
is the sort of thing.
We need to be hearing
we're
this.
not big on that. We come to church full and we give God like,
I know.
Yeah.
There's a place for that, but most of the
Yeah.
psalms are pitched in a very different
Yeah.
place, and I think that should give some. One of the things I tell people is if you misname normal, you really mess people up. And so if people are like basically feeling like, if I was a real Christian, I'd be happy all the time. Like that's really discouraging to like young people in your church, to outsiders. I think a lot of people today think faith is just some sort of temperament that some people have.
Yeah.
Like I don't have the ability to look on life as, as always cheery. That's not faith. Faith is actually seeing more, not closing your eyes to reality, seeing the reality, but also, like Hebrews 11 talks about, seeing the city that is to come. So it's seeing more, not seeing less. So in those early days, very specifically, I want people to understand the Indelible Grace grew out of a pastoral impulse. It grew out of feeling like my students didn't understand how doubt could go along with robust Christian faith. And so I was looking for songs that were more honest about struggle and more explicit about the gospel. And by that, I mean, Tim Keller has this great line that the gospel is news rather than instruction. It's news about what we need to do, not just telling people what they need to do.
It's funny.
And so I was looking for songs that were clear on that, like Let Us Love and Sing and Wonder, like that talks about, justice is, justice smiles and asks no more. I mean, what songs talk about that?
Yes. I was just going to say, it's funny because I preached a sermon last night on what the gospel means. Right. And my first point was the gospel is news. So I think Tim Keller's probably nicked that from me.
Maybe you've been on that for a while, I suspect. Yeah.
Aaron, you get in. I'm the talker. You can tell. So Aaron.
Yeah.
No, I was interested. You talking about the Trinity hymnal because in our tradition we've got a hymnal. It's the Christian hymns. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah, I think I've
So it's the Evangelical Movement of Wales that published it.
Oh, okay. I have an old Welsh hymnal, but I don't have that.
Just have it's really good. It's full of like your classic hymns and also like lots of Welsh ones. So what we do, we find ones which have kind of fallen out of use.
Yeah.
Think of our church as well, and we think, what do our people need to hear? What don't we sing? What would be useful? And then we kind of find tunes and melodies which we think are appropriate for the words. So exactly the same as what you did. It's out of a pastoral impulse that we've done it. I'm interested to know, I suppose, as we kind of do this more, I'm getting a sense that there will be pushback. There are some people who are like, you should just leave the tunes as they are. Don't touch them, they're sacred. Rather than the words are the most important things.
We've said, haven't I, as like it's a bit like people treat tunes sometimes like the Ark of the Covenant, like if you touch it,
rather
sacred.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one thing that was really helpful was I was doing college ministry. I was not the worship director at a church. If I'd been the worship director at a church, I'm not sure it would have happened, because people do send very nasty emails or voicemails, way more like brutal than they would ever send to a preacher about their preaching.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I usually tell somebody, if you're going to be a worship director at a church, if you can, don't publish your cell phone number or your email. Get an email address that goes to like worship@suchandsuchchurch.com and let one of the elders read them first. Because sometimes they might need to pastorally deal with somebody before you just get that unfiltered criticism. It's really amazing.
Wow.
But it's very emotional for people. Now, you also have the added difficulty of Welsh tunes are what Welsh hymns are known for.
Yeah.
Right? The tunes are like world renowned.
They're part of the culture.
So we definitely retuned some hymns that people knew and were singing, but we didn't know that people knew them and were singing them. Like you might think a song like Abide With Me. Like, how could you retune Abide With Me or to something closer to home for you guys, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, right? I mean, you sing it at every football game, right? Yeah. Well, let's talk about Abide With Me. So Henry Light actually wrote his own tune for that hymn.
Wow.
It was in use for about 20 years. It's the tune they sang at his funeral. So anybody that thinks the tune they know is the original, that's not true. As a matter of fact, people ask me regularly, what was the original tune for Dear Refuge or Arise My Soul? And there really weren't original tunes for most texts. In this case, though, Henry Light did write his own tune. But then when they put together Hymns Ancient and Modern, you guys are probably familiar with that hymnal, very important hymnal. And William Henry Monk was the musical editor. He wrote a new tune. That's the tune that they sing at the football matches. It's this hymn they sang at Princess Di's funeral. I mean, it's like your national hymn of mourning in England anyway. I don't know about Wales, but but I didn't know. We didn't ever sing it. I didn't know it. So when Justin Smith wrote that tune, I thought it was nice. But I'd also defend the practice of a fresh tune because sometimes it helps you hear the words again.
Yeah.
So I think that you have to be careful. I understand if you buried your grandmother to this hymn with this tune, it can be very emotional. I'm not out to deconstruct church music. I've tried to find texts that have fallen out of use. And sometimes in some of the early days, I'd say like, here's a text, like I asked the Lord that I might grow, and here's a tune, we can sing it. Like you can sing 3/4 of the English hymnody with a tune for Amazing Grace, Come Thou Fount, and Rock of Ages, because those are 3 different meters and you cover a lot of ground. But I would often Xerox off the words for my Sunday school class or my REF meeting. It's like, we can sing this to Come Thou Fount, but if somebody wants to come up with a tune, we can try it next week. And see, I had with college students and Belmont, half the students are music or music business majors. So had all these incredible singer-songwriters, and they would come back the next week. And the group was very supportive. Not all of those tunes, I think, need to last. But hopefully, you get to add one here or there. You should know most hymn writers are known for one tune or one text, and most tune writers are known for one tune. There's probably people, you could name 5 or 6 hymn writers that know more than a handful of their hymns, right? And if you can add one to the church's thing, sort of collection, or maybe even a hymn that's useful for your church community for a couple of years, that's fine. There's definitely songs we've recorded that I wish we hadn't, or that I'm like, I kind of missed it on that one. And then I find some church that it's like their favorite hymn. So
yeah.
Then
there's some hymn writers like me and Aaron who are famous for none.
You're still young, still wet behind the ears. I'm always going to encourage people to just keep trying. You got to write a lot of bad songs, you'll write a good one.
Yeah,
and perfectionism is really the enemy,
So one thing I definitely want to ask you about is, what's impressive, I think, with Indelible Grace music is people know the name Indelible Grace music, and they may not know you at all, right? Like
that could be true, yeah.
And I think like that name's bigger than your name because your ethos is you're trying to pass the baton on, and that came through in the documentary I said that we watched. And actually, like some names that are linked to Indelible Grace, like Sandra McCracken, it's been, you've poured time and helped them to grow in that gift. Because I think me and Aaron would love not to hoard this sort of thing that we're doing and try and help other people in our church who might be interested in it. To get on board so how could we best help other people in our church to get, we call it renovating hymns, you call it retuning, whatever. I like retuning better than renovating just on first hear. I've never heard that, only because I don't want people to think there's something wrong with them. Yes.
Right. And so like people like, well, what was wrong with the original tune? Not necessarily. Anyway, I think here's what I would encourage. It's easier to resource people on the front end than criticize on the back end, especially when you're talking with creatives. And so I, for instance, found that I could get in the early days Spurgeon's hymn book. There was a group down in Texas that made a paperback copy. And this before Matt Boswell put together the really nice, version of our own hymn book, Spurgeon's, that you can get now. But I could buy those by the case and give them to songwriters. Or Gadsby's hymns. Do you know about Gadsby's hymns?
Yeah.
Gadsby's hymns is particularly interesting. So it's a particular Baptist, Reformed Baptist kind of group, right? I'd have some differences theologically, with him, but for the most part, a lot of really good stuff in there. But it's a jumbled mess of a collection. If you look through it, there's no topical organization whatsoever.
No.
So that's hard, makes it hard to use as a congregational hymnal. But most of the groups that use it have used it for generations, so they know it inside and out. But it's actually really interesting how it functions if you just start reading through it and looking for texts that might jump out at you. So like in those days, like I would give one to Matthew Smith and Matthew Perry Jones and Sandra and Katie Bowser. They all had this blue copy of Gadsby's paperback copy, and they would be reading, and then Katie would find a text and she'd call Sandra and be like, I got dibs on this one, and so that they were doing that.
This one, it's mine.
Yeah, right. No, for sure. And then I found after the first couple records, we had retuned some that people still were pretty attached to. I was like, I need to go find texts, not just that were in old hymnals, but, can I find Anne Steele's poetical works and find hymn texts of hers that never even made it into a hymnal?
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to complain about that. I've never had anybody complain about you changed the tune to Dear Refuge of My Weary Soul. It hadn't been in a hymnal for many, many, many years, and nobody knew it. So, but boy, we needed to sing it, we needed to sing more songs like that. So that can help, is finding texts that people don't have any connection
Don't know. Yeah. No, that's actually, I found one in Gadsby's hymnal called Christ or Else I Die. Are you familiar with it?
Nope, and we haven't done it. So there you go. You found one.
Well, we've got dibs on
1,000 hymns in the book.
There's a lot. There's also another one we've kind of done work on, which is one of Joseph Hart's hymns, which is in Gadsby's hymnal because
it's embedded in there. Yeah, you can buy it by itself too, though. And if you've never read the preface, his
it's amazing
experience, that's a classic thing.
Yeah,
we have that on the Indelible Grace hymn book under the resources. The that bio part.
Yeah, no, it's really good to find.
He wrote most of his first year after getting converted.
Yeah,
as like a spiritual devotional exercise.
Wow.
But Come Ye Sinners sticks out way better than the others. And some of the others, kind of like Isaac Watts, like it'll be great, but then there'll be some weird word, and then you have to wrestle with: do we change the word?
Yeah. We said yes. Let's change some of.
Yeah, that's my attitude too. But I like to keep the these and thous, because I want people to be reminded the church is bigger than people that talk like us and sing like us. But I think one of the keys, guys, is you have to talk about why you're doing what you're doing. If you don't, especially with church music, people just approach it as consumers. That's the way they've been trained. Either I like this or I don't like it. And so you have to talk about why you're doing what you're doing, cast that vision regularly. Then even if they don't like it, they're like, yeah, but I respect what you're doing.
Hey, if you're new around here, thanks for listening to the podcast. Do check out some of our previous Hymnology podcasts in the series as well. Also listen to some of our own hymns. You can type Gabalfa BC Music into Spotify or YouTube, and we have some self-produced EPs that you can listen to. Some of our songs are old hymn texts that we've tried renovating. Some are new original hymns. Anyway, back to the chat with Kevin Twit. Can anyone who's interested in trying to come up with tunes to hymns and get involved with this, do you think if there's a desire there, pretty much anyone could try and do this and maybe could be guided? Or how much is there a giftedness and how much is it just, desire?
Well, I think it's good to do it anyway. I think that if you're going to write a tune to a text, you're really going to have to inhabit that text. So now you hit on one of my little pastoral, secrets, is like, even if these songwriters didn't come up with a tune that we would record, I knew that they were really going to have to inhabit that text and try to enter into it. That was going to be good for them spiritually. Right. And especially because I had some students that were very interested in music and lyrics and really appreciated them, but maybe not sure where they were at with their faith. That was definitely like, I could get them to read this, particularly if they were going to try and write a tune where they might not read J.C. Ryle's Holiness or might not sure what they thought about church. But I also found like reading somebody like Anne Steele, like when I wrote that one, like Alanis Morissette was all over the radio, right? And it was like, why can't we say things like that in church?
Yeah.
And then I was like, here's this when I think Sandra and Katie might have mentioned that in the documentary,
Mm.
like that was really eye-opening for them because there just weren't any like real negative emotions in any Christian music in the 90s. And that was like such a contrast with a lot of the, you know, kind of grunge and a lot of that stuff that was going on in the culture. Like Patty Griffin's first record had come out, and you know that Living with Ghosts, commend that record to you. Brilliant singer-songwriter, and just really kind of raw, honest words. And there was just no counterpart to that in the church music. So thus made the church music feel like we're not dealing with real life.
It's funny.
And I was like, but we used to sing songs that were real life.
Yeah.
You know, like Aunt Steele wrote hymns about panic attacks, you know, and things like, you know, she had malaria and wrote songs about chronic illness and all these sorts of things. But I think like the Let Go, Let God, Higher Life movement probably had something to do with her hymns dropping out of the hymn books. Because for her, the Christian life is a struggle and a fight. And the Higher Life movement says it's easy. And if it's not easy, you're doing it wrong. That was the doctrine, the bad doctrine of sanctification that really screwed me up in my college years. That's why Ryle's Holiness and McShane were so helpful. And I was like, we have got to find songs that are speaking about like the fight against sin is real and hard and long.
I was going to ask about the name Indelible Grace. Is it from A Debtor to Mercy Alone?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because that was the first hymn me and Sam kind of worked on together.
Oh, you did a version too?
We've done a version which isn't out there, and we haven't introduced to our church.
Yeah, that's one of those that I feel like has kind of dropped out of use. So maybe, but I love the text. To see
it's
the
amazing.
law by Christ fulfilled, to hear his parting voice, changes a slave into a child, and duty into choice. I mean, that's again, sanctification was a big part of what I was trying to get at, how the gospel drives the way we should live. So yeah, I'd love to see another version. I've kind of been messing around with a little more R&B version of my tune. Which maybe someday it'll come together. Yeah, it came from that. And then really every record we take a phrase from one of the hymns.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, for one of our Kickstarters, one of the things that people I think enjoyed was I gave them all the words before we released any of the songs and let people submit ideas of phrases that could be used for the title, which I think people enjoyed. We really wanted to make the second record. We really wanted to call it House of Wine. A line from Sands of Time or Sinking.
Yeah.
I didn't think they wouldn't carry the CDs in the Baptist bookstores. Oh well. But now the Baptist bookstore is no more, and the record still sells. So there.
I thought I'd finish off by asking you, maybe especially in light of what you've gone through the last year through COVID, what your most favorite, or it probably changes, but your favorite hymn, or maybe your favorite hymn writer.
Yeah, it doesn't change. For Ann Steele is definitely the one, and Dear Refuge of My Weary Soul. I just love that. Though she also has a 39 verse hymn that we took a few verses and used for what one? Oh, Love Incomprehensible.
Okay.
Like for that, I don't know if you've ever done this, but you can take verses from one hymn and stick them with another. So we took a one verse, and the chorus is from a Top Lady hymn, but the other verses are from this 39 verse Ann Steele hymn that basically starts from creation to consummation. I love to do it as like a Easter kind of meditation. But Ann Steele is absolutely my favorite. And is this just a podcast or is it a video too?
It'll be a video too. So
then hold on, let me show you something cool.
It's going to be an original Ann Steele book, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So look, 1808, Boston edition, 2 volumes. This is actually published under her name.
Wow.
Okay. So, but before that, well, I'll show you the first one first. So this, and if anybody wants to sell me the matching volume with this is first edition. It's volume 2. I don't have volume 1, but this is 1769. Okay. And you notice it was under the name Theodosia. She published under a pen name, right?
Wow.
So then when she died, they reprinted those first 2 volumes and added a third posthumous volume. So this is 1779, 1780. and still under Theodosia, and then the 1808. So yeah, I really would love to find volume 1 of this, or even find both volumes, and I'll sell this one.
You're doing some wheeling and dealing on the podcast.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Kevin, thanks so much for spending the time on.
Oh, enjoyed it
Yeah, thank
immensely,
you.
guys, and hopefully we'll cross paths again. If you're ever in Nashville, like, look me up.
Yeah,
If I
Yeah.
make the Wales, I'll look you guys up for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, man. God bless.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hymnology 101 with Kevin Twit. And thank you so much, Kevin, if you're listening. We really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And we're so thankful for the hymns that you and Indelible Grace Music have retuned. We have more special guest episodes lined up with people whose hymns we currently sing in Gabalfa Baptist Church. Some really exciting stuff coming up. So if you like what you're listening to, then just like and subscribe and all that stuff. And as ever, any questions at all, just email me at sam.smith@gabalva.co.uk. We'll catch you on the next episode.